go. Welcome back to another Flesh and Blood video here in the trash. I feel like it's been a while. It really hasn't, but I'm happy to be here because today I've got a very special interview for you. The interview is pretty long, so I won't spend too much time here. I just want to get right into it. But before we do, I just want to say thank you guys for the 500 subs we got there. And that means that we're going to be doing a giveaway here sponsored by the Meta. So stick around. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you guys think about the video, if you guys have anything to say. And I'll be announcing the giveaway soon. So stick around and I'll see you guys soon. Enjoy the interview. So today I'm joined by a very special guest, Tarek Patel. Welcome, Tarek. How's it going, dude?
Going great. You know, it's almost Friday, so looking forward to the weekend.
So for those of you that don't know, Tarek is the U.S. national champion for Flesh and Blood and the Calling Cincinnati finalist. And, you know, I'm not 100% sure, but were you in Vegas as well?
No, I hadn't started playing the game at that time, so I was not in Vegas.
Okay, great. So that's actually a really perfect jumping in point because I was going to ask eventually, but I think it's a good thing to ask now is how long have you been playing the game and like what got you into Flesh and Blood? We'll just jump right into that.
Yeah, for sure. I started the game functionally when Tales of Aria came out. The pre-release was pretty much my first event. What drew me into the game was the organized play announcement. They came out with the $1 million prize pool or something like that for 2022. You know, I saw the tweet. I reached out to some of my local hometown friends. They were playing the game, got them to teach it to me, showed up at Tales of Aria pre-release, and the rest was history from there.
That's amazing. And I didn't actually start playing the game until like a little bit before that. My introduction to the game, like a lot of people, I think, was the Monarch Blitz decks. Because that's what everybody was like, oh, if you want to learn Flesh and Blood, this is a good way to start. And it was a good way to learn the game. And I picked it up and I was playing with my brother, actually, who I used to play. I mean, I'm a Magic the Gathering player, now turned Flesh and Blood player, like I think many of us are. And of course, I want to ask your background on that too. But yeah, it's interesting how a lot of people are getting into it and then immediately doing stuff. Like, that's pretty crazy that, you know, going from just a few months of learning the game to winning, you know, obviously nationals, and then in Cincinnati having an amazing performance as well. So like, what's your background then? Did you come from Magic the Gathering, and have you played it before competitively?
So yeah, I have quite an extensive gaming history in general. It started probably when I was 13 years old, 12 years old, back in like middle school. I found the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game for the first time. You know, I think like most kids our generation, you know, I watched the anime Dragon Ball Z, whole 9 yards. So when I saw that and I found the cards in real life, I think that was my first kind of introduction to trading card games, my local game store. And then through that, you know, over the years, I started playing other games competitively. StarCraft 2 is probably the one I sank the most time and energy into over the years. And I got quite competitive at that. Played a little bit of Halo for a little bit, travel around the local amateur scene, went to a couple of MLGs, never really did well. But from there, I was kind of hooked on competitive gaming. As school kind of get more and more in depth and involved, I quickly realized I couldn't continue playing, you know, the traditional esports like StarCraft at such a high level because of the practice that required to stay at the top level. So I saw, I think, Pro Tour Theros. I was like back in 2013 was probably my first time really being introduced to pro level Magic. And I remember watching the French guy. His name's slipping me right now, but he beat Sam Black in the finals with a mono blue deck.
That Gab Nassif?
Not Gabe Nassif. The other French guy. Not very popular. I know that now.
Okay.
Anyways, so that was my first foray into, you know, Magic the Gathering. I picked up the mono blue deck. I started playing more and more competitively over time. Back then, you could actually play Magic Online for tickets, and they had quite a bit more value than they did today.
Mm-hmm.
So as a broke college student, part-time, what I'd do is, you know, I'd run through leagues and leagues and leagues. Or back then, they were called dailies. And it would actually front me enough money up front to pay for my trips to go to GPs and so forth. So, you know, I never, you know, made it super big in Magic. I never like won a pro tour or anything. But among the grinders and the local scenes, I think people I knew who I was a bit. I topped multiple SCGs. I topped an Invitational. I have a GP top 8. Been on a couple pro tours. So I've been around the game for about 10 years almost, or 8 years, I guess now. Played at almost every kind of event you can play at except for Worlds. Um, so I have quite an extensive history in competitive card game backgrounds and gaming in general. And then when I saw the organized play announcement from Flesh and Blood, I kind of transitioned into it. And it was a combination of right place, right time. Had a great Flesh and Blood community around me in the Florida area. Um, and then my background gave me a solid foundation to kind of learn this game and jump right in the deep end.
Right. There's so many like interesting things that you said that I want to point out there. First, you mentioned that school is getting hectic, and I don't know if everybody knows this, at least publicly, and if it, let me know if I should edit this out. But I think Rob told me you're a doctor, right? Like that's your job, your day job.
Yeah, so currently I'm a third year resident right now. I graduate in about 6 to 8 months. I don't like publicly like shout that out from a rooftop, but
Okay.
yeah, that is what I do.
Yeah, you're not like at the calling like I'm a doctor and I'm ready to sit down at this table and play a card game. It's like
Yeah,
it is what it is. It's just
yeah,
you're a dude. You're a dude playing a card game.
pretty much. Yep.
That's cool. I did want to ask you a little bit about the Briar deck because I saw you tweet about it. Obviously, you're the pioneer of this like super aggro Briar constructed deck, and it did amazingly well. Everyone was all over the deck in Florida, and it did kind of leak in Cincinnati. Was that because I remember Rob mentioning this to me? He was like, "Our deck leaked," because I think you guys test together, right? You and Rob, and he was. I know you guys were maybe a little worried that the deck was being seen before it was supposed to be out there at nationals. Do you have a little bit of background on that story?
Yeah, for sure. So the deck was leaked at Cincinnati. Chris Higashi ended up top aiding with it at the Pro Tour qualifier
Mm-hmm.
uh, at Cincinnati.
ProQuest, yeah.
ProQuest qualifier. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rob and I were a bit worried. I think the week before I kind of put him on the deck, he had some issues at the time. He's like, can it beat this? Can it beat that? He came to me. He's like, if you beat me convincingly in a couple of matches, I'll be on it. So I did that, and he quickly realized, what the deck was and what it was capable of. So he jumped on it. So him and I were trying to keep it hush hush at the time, and it kind of got out through the grapevine. Backstory on that: when I first started playing this game, I came up with the deck, probably about a week or two into it. I wasn't egotistical enough to really believe that I'd broken the format per se. So naturally, you give it to one or two people to kind of work on the deck with, have a conversation with, and from there it kind of just branched out. And it got through the people that came to Flesh and Blood through the Magic community were the people that kind of were playing it behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So I had some of them message me, about the deck, and I brought them into the fold. So when Higashi top aided, I kind of went up to him and I asked him, I was like, "Hey, just out of curiosity, did you come up with this deck by yourself, or if you didn't, where did you get it from?" Because it's not usual to see Blue
Like,
Captain's Call or Nimbleism before,
right.
this series of events. And he told me he got it from Jonathan Job, who's an SCG tour grinder who I've known from the circuit, and who reached out to me and who got it through Matthew Folks, who's one of the original people I'd shared the deck with. So that's how it kind of made its way out, which is fine. I expected it to kind of leak to some degree, but I hope that whoever picked up the deck would be cognizant of what they had and not play it at an event like a Pro Tour, ProQuest qualifier.
Right.
It did affect it to some degree. I kind of spoke about this before, but when you first see a deck like this, right, the natural belief or reaction is to be skeptical of it. So the original idea was, it makes its debut at UK Nationals, and maybe one or two people play it, depending on whoever in Europe tests together. And maybe it wins, maybe it just top eights. But the original hope was it debuts Sunday before US Nationals, which is on Friday of that week.
Right.
And then lists don't even get released till Wednesday. So a lot of people that have been on their pet deck for months or been testing for months, they're not going to jump ship right away to a new kind of deck just because they put up one event. And then you have all these questions: can it beat fatigue? Can it beat an aggro mirror, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But what ended up happening, because Higashi topped, 3 weeks prior in Cincinnati, it kind of put that deck on the radar. So people saw the list, they got to ask all their questions, they got to test against it. And then when Europe came along, it kind of cemented everybody's idea of just, okay, this thing is real. We need to either be playing it or need to beat it, which kind of, forced me to kind of refine the deck a little bit further, which is where you end up seeing my list that ended up winning, the Yellow Ravenous, and just like as consistent as possible.
Right.
Yeah, that's a little backstory.
That's
on that.
awesome. Yeah, I didn't know the whole backstory there, and especially with the UK Nats thing. I think that's really interesting because like after Cincinnati, it obviously had more time out in the world, so people were able to test it, like you said, and then play with it and see what was going on with that deck. And it's going off of what you said earlier. What I think is one of the interesting things about this game, and I think is why a lot of people like you or I or like other people that are really interested in Flesh and Blood right now. One of the most interesting things is how young it is. So when you build a deck like Briar, the way you did, there aren't a ton of tools for that deck. There's just not a lot of breakpoint, zero costed, or cheap attacks in this game because it's only existed for a couple of years. So when you look at the options, you have sideboard cards, but they're not necessarily. It's not a complete like overhaul with this sort of deck. And testing, I think, with competitive decks when it comes to Flesh and Blood is really interesting because it's really, really minute changes, right? Would you agree with that it's like super small details, or do you find like that between the versions of that deck that there were some like big overhauls?
A little column A, little column B. You're definitely right that the actual variety between possible decks is small, right? Like you have the option of playing Coax of Commotion, Seek the Horizon, the generic zero, like just is a 4/3, or Yellow Ravenous Rabble, right? Those are your really only options.
Mm-hmm.
I think people got a little bit more cute than they were probably supposed to with the list. They started actually adding extra blues to the deck. They started playing one drops, which kind of took it a little bit further away from the core principle of what it was supposed to be: play free cards to generate free value. And they kind of made it their own and added some flavor.
Right.
Not necessarily wrong, but they added their own kind of identity to the deck. But you are definitely right that the options available to keep the core concept the same is very limited, which is probably why they kind of branched out into one drops and so forth.
Right. And was there a moment when you were testing this deck? Obviously, convincing Rob was a funny one, but like, was there a moment where you knew? Like you said that you obviously went in kind of humble, like I don't know if the deck's going to be that great. But was there a moment that was like, okay, this is legit and this can win me nationals? But obviously there were so many people running this deck after it leaked in Cincinnati and then into nationals. We saw so much Briar being played, but like only you won with it, and you are the person that brought this forward. So obviously the pilot matters quite a bit, which is great, I think, to see. But yeah, like when was the moment where you were like, yeah, I can do this with this deck?
So the aha moment that this deck was really good was when I was playing against decks quite early on, and being so new to the game, I had no idea what my opponent was doing or what the cards they did, but I was still winning quite convincingly. So I remember playing against Prism and having to read like every aura like 3 or 4 times, and they were just like putting cards in their pitch zone and putting like Spectre Shields and this and that, and I have no idea what was going on. I'm just like, I trust you, and then I was still winning. So when you have no idea what's going on either side of the board state and you're still winning, that was a good sign that I was probably onto something. And originally I wasn't playing the deck to win nationals because at the time I wasn't even queued for nationals because I missed the not ProQuest, Road to National season. So I was only originally testing it because the calling in Orlando was 15 minutes from where I live now.
Right.
It wasn't until after Cincinnati where I came second that I was able to use that pro invite or whatever to put towards nationals that I started gearing towards, how do we test for nationals now? But at that point I knew Higashi had already top 8'd. So I was kind of on the mindset of, let's refine this deck rather than, is this deck good? By then it was answered, by Higashi, by just my reps in Classic Constructed at that time. That question was already.
Right. I mean, that's a hilarious way to know the deck is good. Is like, I don't know how to, I'm like still reading a lot of these cards. I don't understand the meta and I'm still winning. Like, I think that's an interesting point too. Cause one of the reasons I reached out to you is because I saw you tweet about Briar and like potentially changing the card, errataing it, what cards could maybe be changed to make this deck maybe a little bit better or like more fair and not see like the overwhelming like meta presence that we did chain. And that's my issue with the deck. And this isn't a critique of the deck itself, because when you're playing at a competitive level, you know, I've heard the dudes at Arsenal Pass all the time. They talk about it. They're meta slaves, right? Like at a certain point, you are playing the best deck because you can win with it. And, you know, there are fun decks that you might bring and you might play casually, but you're, as a competitive player, you're always trying to have the edge on your opponent. And so after Cincinnati, I saw the Briar list. I talked to a couple friends and I built that deck and I played it. And it was the first time that I played Flesh and Blood and felt like I wasn't playing Flesh and Blood. And for the wrong reasons. Like it was, so here's my experience with it. And I think we can talk about like the changes that we would make to it a little bit after this, but like it felt, so Flesh and Blood for me, like flavor matters. I think I'm not like a huge competitive person. Obviously I've casted before and I enjoy being part of it. But I'm not like out here trying to grind, and that's not like really my goal when it comes to card games. And so like the flavor of the heroes when it comes to Flesh and Blood is like amazing to me. You have all these cards that feel like they do something that relates to the hero type. Like each hero feels unique and special. Like Azalea, I know she's shit and people shit on her, but I love that hero because she's all about top deck manipulation and using your arsenal, and it's flavorful. It's an interesting hero. Even Viserai, the other Runeblade hero, feels unique with the rune chant tokens. And then you have someone like Briar that's just like, you play cards and there's value. And that's it. And I've talked about this before on another podcast, Fresh and Buds, my buddy Tommy's podcast. And I just feel like when I play that deck, I feel like I'm playing a card game and not playing a game as a hero, if that makes any sense.
No, you're absolutely right. And, you know, and that's what I found about the deck too early on. And we actually mentioned it in our little testing group too, that this deck just kind of feels like a mismatch of, you know, good cards that kind of existed throughout Flesh and Blood and just kind of ended up in a Briar deck. Like there was a Lexi version that ran almost the exact same cards because the elemental cards were so few and we were just using the flip effect of Lexi's ability to give the inherent go again.
Right.
So yeah, you're completely right. And to tell a little funny side story, my local board game like friend group, they didn't ban me from board game night, but I have a reputation of kind of doing this kind of thing in board games too, where you look at the objective of the game and it's very clear when, especially if it's like player versus environment or so forth, and you're supposed to complete something in a certain way, you know, of just going out and thinking of alternative ways to just break the board game. And it makes the game a little bit less fun for everybody else. So I definitely do understand what you're saying, that this deck is kind of just a generic boogeyman right now and doesn't fit into the traditional themes that Flesh and Blood is kind of introduced and is trying to keep. So
Right. And you know, it's going to happen. It's a hero-based card game. I think with other card games you can easily ban like a card. It's the challenge that I think Legend Story Studios has, right? Is that they have heroes and the legend rule existing is great. The living legend rule. But there will potentially be heroes that need to be changed. And I think Briar is the first hero that kind of like, with Chain is still a flavorful hero in ways. I think Chain is an interesting hero. With Briar, I feel like her abilities don't fit in the game. She doesn't feel like an elemental hero. She doesn't feel like a rune blade. She just feels like a hero that does good things and good, powerful things. And that, I feel like, defeats a lot of what they're trying to do at Legend Story Studios. And so, I mean, you might agree, but I feel like she's the first hero that I feel like her hero ability and like what she does probably needs a change. And if so, like, how do you handle that? Like, do you reprint the card and ban the old one? Like, it's just a weird, uncharted territory. But I do feel like she doesn't necessarily fit in the game right now, where others seem, you know, like they can be dealt with.
I completely agree. I mean, it's too much to ask, I think, for a single card ban. You look at the deck, it's all redundant 0/4s, right? No card by itself is uniquely powerful. A lot of people point to Plunder Run as like the issue, but going forward, you know, I may not be running the full 9 as the meta changes. Plunder Run is obviously a very good card, but it's also needed for other decks to exist in the format. what a lot of people don't realize is games like this need to have this asymmetry to kind of skew a little bit towards aggro so that it doesn't become this boring stalemate where you constantly fatigue and block out. Because let's be honest, that's just as not fun as any kind of Briar mirror match. If an
Right.
Olden player or anybody else just throwing their hand on the table every turn until you deck, that's not much better either. So I think cards like Rosetta Thorn, cards like Plunder Run, that kind of skew it and make it asymmetrical in the favor of aggro for the necessity of progressing the game forward to an ending are necessary to some degree. And if you ban a card like Plunder Run or whatever else, then you're going to kill decks like Agrokatsu, etc. When you don't really mean to do that, and it's going to just, I think, create a ripple effect of problems. And I think you're right. The cleaner solution is kind of just to address Briar itself. And it's hard to do that because it creates this dichotomy of you fix an issue, but you create this issue where newer players get a hero and it doesn't do what it says, and it causes all this confusion. I have a bit of a cleaner solution. I don't know if LSS will listen to it, but my first thought about changing, if you were going to fix anything, is perhaps just changing the token itself. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
what this does is it allows Briar to be played and read as printed. So that doesn't change. But going forward, you change what the lightning token says and you change what the earth token says. And maybe you change the lightning token to say, the next elemental rune blade, lightning, and earth attack gets go again, or
Right.
something to that effect, to make it more flavorful. You need to play an elemental card in this elemental hero to get its elemental bonus. And two, hopefully it doesn't confuse players that much. They may get an old lightning token and maybe a little bit confused, but I feel like that's a little bit more of a simpler fix going, oh, it kind of works like that, but you have to use the elements that are listed on the
Yeah.
what do you think?
No, I think that's a great idea. I mean, it's such a challenge, like we said, but LSS, if you're listening, I think that's a great one. Like the tokens, they really solve a big issue with it because then you don't have to reprint the hero, and it does make it more flavorful. Like adding the criteria of having to use those elemental cards is really what these decks are about anyway, right? And you said the perfect point, and this is something that I've talked about before too, is that with your deck, and I think it's actually a good thing, right? Like I think overall the Briar deck is a good thing to happen to the game because it's a problem to be solved for Legend Story Studios. It's not like ruining the game. It's a unique challenge that now they have to approach design differently, I think. And yeah, like the zero costed cards, those need to exist. Like generic cards need to exist in this game. They exist in all the decks. Like I play them in my lower tier decks, and if you were to ban those cards, then it would disproportionately affect other decks to the Briar deck, which I think Briar should also exist because aggro decks are good and healthy in a game. So it's that interesting balance for sure. But it's an interesting, really, really interesting point in the game right now. Speaking of interesting point in the game, we just got a bunch of news on the Everfest set, the new expansion set coming out. Did you get to take a look at any of that stuff?
Kind of. I know that they spoiled the skull cap, and there's
Yep.
going to be a bunch of reprints. And I saw the paper packaging, which is fantastic. I'm always more eco-friendly, so I heard a little bit, but past that, not too much.
Yeah, there's not that many details out now. I made a quick video about it, talking about whatever they had on the website. But I think it's going to be awesome to see what they come out for all the heroes in the game, and if that's going to shake up the meta. Are you always looking to just play what you see as the most powerful, or do you have any like more casual decks that you run for fun outside of testing with all the competitive friends?
Not really. I've never been much of a casual player. Like the No Rush 25 in StarCraft, the EDH and Magic. It's never really been an appeal of mine, mostly because I don't understand I understand it intellectually or conceptually, but for me, I sat down. I'm going to answer this with a story. I was
Hmm.
offered at my local game store to join in a game of EDH once, and I was given an EDH deck by one of the players, and then said player got mad at me for the way I was playing in the 4-player EDH game. So it kind of just like, not mad, but he was like, "You're not supposed to be you're not supposed to be killing this person. You're supposed to be doing that." Like, so that kind of casual mindset in EDH, or playing decks for fun, even though it may not be the most optimal thing, has never really been my. Um, it's never really been fun for me. For me personally, is optimization. Finding the best thing has always been kind of like interesting to me, like how things work, like functionally, conceptually, and then just kind of working towards optimization is always what to me is the most fun. And once
Right.
it kind of reaches that point, it's kind of like, okay, this is it.
Yeah. That's cool. There's something for everybody, right? And I think that that's an interesting way to handle it, and it's also a good way to be social too. Because I think a lot of the times people go like, "Oh, Commander's the social format, and that's my way to like have a beer with friends." And that's why I play that format. I'm not a huge EDH person. I do enjoy it when I can sit down, have a drink, and as long as the game doesn't go 2 hours, then I'm happy. But like, it's a good way to like connect with friends and hang out. But do you kind of cherish that time when you get to test your decks with the friends, either with through webcam or in person? Is that like would you say that's how you get your like enjoyment of socialization, or like outside of that, what other hobbies do you do to like kind of have fun in a different way?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I socialize with I have friend groups that are like normies in real life who do not play video games at all, and
Hmm.
we'll just hang out and do normal stuff like sports. My girlfriend and I like to kind of just hang out at home, watch movies, go on dates, so forth. My friends on Discord, a lot of them are Magic players, but they're of the similar mindset of me. So nobody really plays EDH in that group. We'll just kind of hang in on Discord and play different games. For a while, we were playing, we all had a pretty bad Call of Duty addiction. Me, Shaheen, Matthew Dilks, Ryan, we were all on Call of Duty. So my gaming friends will usually hang out and kind of game, but usually more towards the competitive end of it. And socially, like that, we'll just kind of hang out on Discord. But occasionally we do have like board game night and sometimes that kind of stuff. But I definitely say my way of casually hanging out is definitely just jamming out competitive games on Discord and so forth. Testing wise, weirdly, I've never really, really focus tested with my friends per se. It's always more just kind of jam as much as possible versus whoever's available. Because
Hmm.
especially as you get older, as you can attest, time becomes, of the element, right? It's harder to get X amount of people in the same place at the same time. Everybody's 30-ish, everybody has a job, some people are tired. So really committing time to practice is a big deal.
Right.
Now I've been introduced to the Arsenal Pass people, and they are like surprisingly like very regimented on
Yeah.
like they test every day at this time, and they do this. It's like I was like, wow, like this is like hardcore.
Hmm.
So maybe that'll change going forward. As I get more acclimated to their group, if I start hanging out with them a little bit more. But traditionally, it's more just been whoever's on, let's jam some games. If nobody's on, I'll start hitting up random people. Like even on the Flesh and Blood Discord when I first started, I'd play against whoever, whenever was possible, and I would just play as much as possible. And then even against myself, used to be the most testing I did. I would literally have a deck in paper, have a deck on TTS, and just play hundreds of iterations
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean that's dedication, man. That's one way to do it, and totally respect that. I agree. It's hard to get people together. I try and personally dedicate like one day a week to it. In my Discord, we do like a Flesh and Blood Friday, and we just try and I just try and get people together and play it. There's a lot of people I think in the Magic community and other card game communities that are interested in Flesh and Blood, but don't know like how to get into it or if they should get into it. And I guess that's a good last question for you. Uh, I have one tiny question after that. But before we go, how would you recommend people get into it? Obviously, as a competitive player, it's a different perspective because you're not going to recommend like Ultimate Pit Fighter because you don't really care about that. But like what do you think? Flesh and Blood is worth it? Is it a scam? I mean, that's a question that goes around a lot too. It's like, is this a game's a scam? I think people are weird about that for some reason, but it is something that they say.
So to answer your last question, it is not a scam. I
No.
think the value of a lot of cards are held because people simply want them. It is a simple supply and demand thing, and that is very real. So if you are, if you've played the game and you enjoy playing it, and you're on that fence of should I buy this $100 card that's played in every deck, Will it go down? Will it hold value? I think it is a safe bet to buy the card and you can only get rewarded going forward, because the only way that card goes down is if this game dies. And with the amount of love and hype going into 2022, I don't see that happening. So if any of the people listening right now, are on the fence, go to TCG Player, go to your local game store, put that $100 bill down, and just buy the card you're on the fence about. Um, in terms of how to get into the game, I think the best way to do it is try and get into your local community. The whoever around you is playing it, whether it be a couple friends, your local game store, your Discord group, even the international Discord group on Discord. There's always people looking for games. I'm a big proponent of the best way to learn something is to simply do something. There are a lot of good YouTube video, a lot of good YouTube channels out there. Arsenal Pass, Fabrica,
Yeah, they're great.
Andy. So like, there's a lot of good stuff out there. You just kind of have to watch what you can, watch what you're interested in, and play as much as you can. Just jump in.
Just jump in. That's the best way to do it. I agree with you, man, totally. And I agree. It's not a scam. But yeah, before we go, my last question to you, just going into the Pro Tour season and looking into the future of Flesh and Blood, are there any other players that we should be looking out for? Anyone, in your group, anyone that you've got your eye on? Obviously, there was an interesting rematch between you and Michael Fang, right? And I think a lot of people were focused on that, myself included, because I got to watch you play, and I got to cast your final match in Cincinnati, and then obviously watched you guys play again in nationals. But is there anyone that you say you should look out for? Is there any like rivalry going on here between you and Michael going into Pro Tour season, or what's the deets on the Flesh and Blood community going into the Pro Tour?
I don't think there's any official rivalry. I mean, I like to give Michael a hard time that I'm coming for him. I was coming for him. I ended up winning, but I think he knows that I respect him a lot as a player. I definitely do think he's probably one of, if not the best player in America. Just watching how tight he plays really impressed me both throughout Cincinnati and U.S. Nationals. So, in terms of players to watch, definitely Michael Fang. Up and coming, it's hard not to give a shout out to Michael, who won the last calling in Orlando with a pretty innovative deck of old time. So he's definitely good. Hard to say otherwise. I'm not like super
Familiar.
Familiar with all the North American names, but there are a lot of people that I both watched and played against at U.S. Nationals that I thought were very solid people. And as I get more acclimated with the community and who people are, I'm sure I'll have a better answer for you in the future. Like, even I didn't know Tyler, who I played twice in that tournament, had won GP Vegas until somebody told me after the fact, like, that guy won, or not GP, sorry, the calling in Vegas. Told me, hey, that guy won the calling. So that's kind of like how out of the loop I am a little bit in terms of like who won what. But definitely an impressive player in himself. So I'm sure I'll have a way better answer for you in a couple minutes.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people are excited to see how they develop the story on you guys when we go towards the Pro Tour and see how everyone gets focused on, which is exciting because it's obviously an invite-only thing, and it's going to be intense for a lot of people to watch that and participate in it. So psyched for that. And thank you, man. I just want to thank you again for your time. I don't want to keep you too long here. So before we head out, is there anywhere that you want to plug, anything you got going on, maybe your Twitter handle? I'm going to include all that in the description for the video of this, but if you want to just plug that really quickly, go ahead, let people know where to find you, and then let you on your way.
Yeah, for sure. So you can follow me on Twitter at TarikPatel10. Besides that, I don't got too much else to plug. I just hope everybody out there is happy and healthy and having a good COVID life. Hope things return back to normal in the next couple of years. I anticipate things to get a lot better in 2022, in 2023. So I really hope everybody's just happy and healthy. And yeah, follow me on Twitter if you want to hear my thoughts and opinions.
Awesome, man. Great. Thank you so much again. And I'll talk to you later.